Pam, thank you so much for coming. My name, of course, is Iqbal Akhtar, and this is another episode of our podcast on Interfaith Miami, looking and connecting to the leaders of the interfaith movement here in South Florida. So we are very honored to have Pam here with us, and we want you to talk to us a little bit about your background and your history.
Okay, I'd be more than happy to. Thank you for inviting me to join you for this.
Of course.
So my name is Pamela Leer. I've lived in Miami for 13 years now. Moved here from Southern California, and I lived in Southern California 30 years. Prior to that, I was an Air Force kid. So we traveled all over the world. I've lived in a whole variety of places, including 7 different states and overseas, 2 different times. And I'd say, in regard to the Jewish community, I've always been very active. It's always been a large part of my identity.
Okay.
However, the first 10 years of my life when we lived on Air Force bases, it was not really relevant. It wasn't part of my life. I don't think I even knew I was Jewish, to be perfectly honest.
Okay.
Although my family is of Ashkenazi background, has been for many, many years,
Sure.
going back, I think, at least as many generations as we can count. I'll put it that way. And then I moved to Memphis, Tennessee, which a lot of people don't know is actually a fabulous Jewish community. It's large, it's active, it's got plenty of resources, and it was one of the best places I could imagine growing up Jewish. At the same time, it was the 1970s, and segregation and busing were in full force. So I was in the midst of a community that was struggling hugely, primarily with the African American community, but really with anyone who was not Southern and white, to be honest. And there was a significant degree of anti-Semitism even back then. In the 1970s. It's come and gone over the years. So my Jewish identity is very important to me, always has been, but it's also been unique in that I've been living in numerous different places over the years.
So you said that you lived abroad. Where did you live?
So I lived abroad in Japan with the Air Force when my father was in the service, and I also lived abroad in Ireland when my husband got a job over there. My children were ages 2 and 6.
That must have been interesting. So how was that experience living?
It was fascinating. I'm really grateful that I got to have it. It was really insightful into another population, I'd say. Now, this was before a lot of immigrants had moved to Ireland, which has happened in the last 20 years. This was 25 years ago. And what I saw that was probably most interesting to me was the long-lasting effect on the Irish people of the British occupation. The British having been in there during the potato famine, during the times of feudal periods, during times when they just kept the Irish down. And even then, at that point, which was, 50, 60 years later, after Ireland had its independence, at least southern part of Ireland, I still saw so much repercussion from that. And so many people who were having a very difficult time learning how to be independent and on their own, really to stand up straight. I could literally walk into a shop and someone would say, "Oh, so you're an American. How did you know?" And they would say, "Well, it's the way you walked in. You walked in, looked around like you owned the place." We Irish, we don't do that.
That's very interesting. No, the impact of the English colonization, I think it had a huge impact on in terms of
It did. And the impact, I think, of growing up in the Mid-South, which is what Memphis, Tennessee is considered. It's also called the Bible Belt. Part of that culture. And having people work in our home. My father was a physician, so we had a very comfortable life, and having people work in the home who were never quite like us.
So did people in Memphis know you were Jewish?
Yes and no.
Okay.
We were a very active part of the Jewish community. We had a huge Jewish community center. I did things, I was very fortunate. I went away to Jewish camp every summer for 8 or 9 weeks. It was a fabulous experience. Went to synagogue a lot. I even was a bat mitzvah at the age of 13, which a lot of Jews nowadays don't experience, for girls at least. At the same time, we had to be careful. My mother was a radio broadcaster, and she had a talk show on air every afternoon for a number of years. And she didn't use my father's last name when she was on air, because number one, he was a known physician, and number two, it was a Jewish name.
So what is
the name was Rosen, Rosen.
Rosen, okay.
Which he had actually shortened from Rosenzweig, which was the German name his family had been given. His parents were still Rosenzweigs, but he had shortened it because, as he said, the nurses can't pronounce it, no one can spell it. But it was also part of assimilating into America. So my mother used her actually first name and middle name, Sherry Lee, when she was on the radio. And she interviewed people who of all different faiths, colors, backgrounds, etc. She even interviewed, I forget his name at the moment, but the fellow who led the Ku Klux Klan for years.
Yeah, right.
She interviewed all kinds of celebrities.
Wow.
But there were also she also worked as a journalist. And so she got to know people in difficult situations who were being kept down, kept in their place, so to speak, because of culture or religion. And I know that she fought for some of them, and she stood up for the rights of various people. And I know this from newspaper articles because I was a teenager and I didn't care. To be honest, I learned more about my mother after she passed away.
Oh, wow.
Than I really knew when she was alive.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's very interesting because I think like being in the South, you're kind of, there's this point, like you're both Jewish and also seen as white, I think, right?
Correct.
By
Always
many
felt
of the
white.
Black people, right?
Always felt that way.
Yeah. And so you're kind of like in between these sorts of identities.
I wasn't impacted directly by anti-Semitism,
Okay.
with a few exceptions. Stories for things like I did because of the busing and all of that. My parents did send me to a very small elite private school. But we had a lot of different people there, and I'll never forget things like people tossing out coins on the floor, saying, "Let's watch the Jews go pick up the coins."
Wow.
Because there was this reputation
Right.
that the Jewish people were scrambling for money.
Right.
I had a job at one point with a boss who was a Methodist preacher, I think. But we were in a business circumstance. We were on our way to meet a client, and we're in the car, and he's strategizing how to deal with the client, and he says, "We got to Jew them down."
Wow.
And I did have to, I'm pretty forward, so I did say I find that very offensive, and we need to talk about why that kind of language is not okay. So the encounters I've had have been difficult, but they didn't affect me personally in terms of who I am and what I'm able to be doing.
So at what point did your sense of like Jewish identity and Jewish consciousness come to the fore? Was there an event in your life that you can say, okay, well, this is really when, yeah.
So when we moved to Memphis, Tennessee, my father, again, I was 11 years old. My father and mother decided that it was time to join the Jewish community, which they'd always been a part of growing up. And one year we went to the Yom Kippur service, which is the highest holiday of the year. It's a day when you fast. It's a day when you're really asking for forgiveness for all of the things
Like
you
a
may
day
have
of
done wrong.
atonement. Right?
A day of atonement,
Right.
exactly. And a day when they open the gates or close the gates on whatever your life will be this next year. So we're sitting in the synagogue. My father and I went by ourselves for some reason. And about midway through the service, he turns to me and he says, "You want to get out of here?" I've been in Hebrew school. I'm learning from my bat mitzvah. I'm 12 or 13 years old at this point. And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, let's go get something to eat." And I'm very, what's the word? I'm very inculcated at this point in what I'm learning in Hebrew school. And my dad's saying, "Let's get out of here." So we got up and left. And what do you do? And we went over to one of those hibachi restaurants, and we ordered shrimp and steak and all of these things. Shrimp is not a Jewish food. It's not kosher. You don't eat on Yom Kippur. You don't do all of these things. And here my dad is breaking all the rules. And sending me to Hebrew school at the same time to say, you need to learn how to be Jewish. So I felt a real disconnect there. And I feel like that was a time when I had to make a decision. Is this really my thing? Is this who I am? Or is this not who I am? And I really believe it was at that age that I decided, this matters to me. This sense of religion, of spirituality, of community, of faith is something that matters to me a lot. And it was right at that point I made that decision.
Okay.
And my parents continued to support me in that decision.
Right.
But it wasn't the way they chose to go.
Sure.
And we see that with families. People go this way,
Right,
people go
exactly.
that way.
That's right. Yeah.
And it is a choice. For me, it was a choice to be a part of the Jewish community.
Okay. Wow, that's amazing. So then you also got married. Talk to us a little bit kind of, from your youth and then kind of how your relationship to Judaism changed as you got older.
Okay. So I went off to college in California from Tennessee when I was 17. And I met my husband almost immediately. My husband is not Jewish. This month we're celebrating our 41st anniversary.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And we have 2 children. So my husband has never really laid claim to a religion that he cares about. I'd say. And he loves the Judaism. He's never converted. I've never asked him to. I think that's a personal decision. He's never converted, but he's always been supportive. We've always belonged to a synagogue. We've always been part of the community, part of the activities. He comes to services and knows a few of the prayers in Hebrew now, which is very exciting for me.
Great.
And he has a lot of friends in the Jewish community as well. Interestingly enough, we have 2 children who are grown now in their mid-30s, and they're both with Jewish partners, which is kind of like a dream come true.
Right.
I'm not sure how that happened, but I did try to give them a good Jewish education and to let them know how important it is, to me at least, with the hopes that that would carry on, and it seems to have done so. And that's great. And then here we are, 41 years, my husband is still as supportive as ever.
That's amazing.
When it comes to my Judaism. And I do feel like it's a very personal choice. If I had married someone Jewish, it would have been a different ballgame. I don't know how different, though, because I didn't do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what is, as you were transmitting these values, what did Judaism mean to you?
Oh, Judaism is my identity, to be honest. It's my basic identity and has been ever since I was 11, 12 years old. Judaism, to me, is a sense of self. It's a sense of spirituality. It's a sense of religion in regards to faith, study, learning, being a part of a community that is always growing, always learning, and always reaching out to try and make this world a better place. And I like being a part of that. I find that it gives my life purpose and value and meaning. My relationship to the Jewish community is my primary focus, in all honesty. I've participated in many, many ways and continue to do so.
What does it mean to be an American?
What does it mean to be an American? It means to have freedom, which I hope will continue. To be, we've often pondered the question, am I a Jewish American or am I an American Jew?
Sure.
And that's always been an issue in my mind because my grandparents were all Jewish and they were more assimilated.
Sure.
But they worked to be more assimilated,
right.
I should say. It's interesting, my father passed away recently. He wrote a letter to us 4 kids. I'm one of them, the oldest of 4 children. And he wrote a letter to us, and he said, the one regret I have is not understanding how difficult it was for my parents, his parents, my grandparents, in the 1930s as Americans. Even though they weren't in Europe and they didn't experience the Holocaust and Nazism and all that, how difficult it was in the 30s for them. So he grew up with that, and I believe that came through to me in whatever way we have our generational, we call it generational trauma, but our generational messages we pass on. It came to me that we are a people who need to exist and will survive and will go through difficult times. But to be an American to me means a sense of freedom, the ability to speak my mind and to belong to the organizations I wish to belong to, and more importantly, to interact with the people I choose to interact with. Because I choose to interact with more than just the Jewish community. I think that's where this interfaith work comes in.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I choose to interact with people of all different faiths, nationalities, colors, backgrounds. You name it. There's a lot of opportunity out there to get to know others.
Absolutely.
And to learn and grow and hopefully together build a better world.
Absolutely. That's a very interesting, because I know, so from my understanding, your family didn't directly go through the Holocaust, but it had a huge impact, I think, for the American Jewish community as a whole.
Yeah,
Talk to us a little bit about that.
My family did not go through the Holocaust directly. All of my grandparents came to this country around the turn of the century. They were all escaping the pogroms in Russia, so they were all escaping for religious reasons and leaving. But they all spoke English. All the grandparents I knew spoke perfect English. Some of them still knew a little Yiddish, not a lot. But I think what happened was after the Holocaust, and I've read about this some, there was a real deep need amongst the Jewish people to teach the children about what happened. So I was inundated as a child with Holocaust education. And I remember going to a conference for BBYO, the B'nai B'rith Youth Organization, of which I was a very active part, and even writing a script for a story I told that was about being in a concentration camp, as if I had been there. The education was so hard-hitting, I think they might have overdone it a little bit. But it was very important because we had to learn never again. Never again can we let this happen. And I think the Holocaust is very deep within me, as is much of Jewish history. Because
Sure.
the Holocaust is probably the worst thing that's ever happened, but
Right.
there's so many other instances
Events,
in
right.
history where, unfortunately, the Jewish people have been subjugated. There are also times where they have subjugated others, and
Right.
this is a world we live in that is just
Right.
not, humankind is not that kind to each other.
Sure.
It's very unfortunate.
So, as an American Jew,
Yeah.
or Jewish American, what does Israel mean to you then?
Israel means an opportunity.
Okay.
I think that's the way I see it. Unlike some of my cohort at the synagogue at Temple Beth Am, I've only been to Israel once in my whole life, and I was 22 years old. And I'll be perfectly honest, the reason I went is my parents sent me to try and get me to leave my non-Jewish boyfriend. That's why they sent me.
Okay.
They failed. I came back and married him. But it had a tremendous impact on me. Israel to me is, we use the word promised land,
Right.
Eretz Yisrael, we use a lot of different terminology. To me, it's an opportunity that I believe needs to exist in a certain shape and form for people to realize that the Jewish people, as small as we are a teeny tiny 0.2%
Sure.
of the population of the world,
Right.
tiny, that we have a right to exist and a right to survive, albeit I hate to think of it being at the detriment of others. But again, I look at history and I'm not sure how to do it in a way that everyone's going to be happy.
Mhm.
But Israel is very important to me, yes. I can't sing Hatikva, which is the national anthem, without crying. I just can't even do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You said that you talked a little bit about, you had some experience with anti-Semitism when you were growing up.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see anti-Semitism today in the United States?
In the United States, I do not experience it personally, directly, very often.
Yeah.
The last time I experienced it was when my son, who's now in his 30s, was in high school, and someone drew Nazi swastikas all over his notebook.
Wow.
And we went to the principal, and the principal said, "Boys will be boys, what can I tell you?" That was the response we got. Other than that, I hear a lot, I read a lot, I am aware of a lot. There are some things that frighten me when I hear about them.
Right.
But honestly, we've created a world, we're a little bit in a bubble,
Mm-hmm.
I think. We're a little bit in a bubble where we feel very, very safe. And I think we as Jewish people need to get out of that bubble more often, and we need to be really brutally honest about what we see in the world and what we want to make happen in the world. And it's very hard for a lot of people to be that honest and that blunt. But I feel as if we don't have a choice. We are human beings. We are normal people like anyone else. We may have a slightly different perspective, but doesn't everyone have, depending on where they grew up, what they learned, how they were educated, what they've experienced? We're all unique human beings, and I wish we could all focus more on that fact than the fact that we have these different ideas about the world. I'd like to think there's one God up there that really just wants us to get along and saying, "Come on, guys, work a little harder. You can do this."
So what is your vision for the world? I mean, where do you see, I mean, what would you like the world to look like?
What would I like the world to look like? Based on history, I am concerned because I don't think we've ever seen a time in history where there hasn't been war. I think it is apparently human nature to battle with each other, to want the power, to want to profit from, to feel comfortable with. I think there's a human nature part of us that fears, and I think this is what it maybe really is, a human nature part of us that fears not having something that we, for whatever reason, believe we deserve or we own. The way I look at it, we don't really own anything. We are here on this earth. We are taking advantage of what we can while we can,
For a short time.
hopefully taking care of it and treating it as just like our lives. This is lent to us on our lives are not even ours in a sense. You know, we do what we can with them, but our lives are short. And once you're gone, you're gone. You can leave an influence, but only to some degree.
Right.
You know, and I wish that we could see a world where people realize I'm a tiny part of something very big, very important, and very, very beautiful. And I want to just make it more beautiful. I want to get along. I want to learn more about each other. I want to, I've had a chance to meet your little son, who's only a year old now, many times. And I want that little baby to know that I'm just another human being who cares about him and cares about his welfare as much as anyone does.
Absolutely.
I think that's the world we need to create, is the world where we listen to each other, where we learn to dialogue and listen in ways that for whatever reason we weren't taught. I heard you interviewing someone a little bit earlier and asking about, I forget the term you used, but the way we treat each other.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was teaching 6th grade at one point, I've had a couple of different careers, when I was teaching 6th grade, and I realized that the kids in my class were just not really being kind to each other.
Yeah.
And I remember creating these big posters with words on them that had to do with our behavior.
Right.
And I hung them up from the ceiling all over the room. And every week we talked about a different one.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to focus on, particularly doing research and thinking about character and value formation. Yeah, and that's a really important, something that we've kind of lost, I think, in terms of education. We focus on the technical aspect of science or, sort of these terminologies, but if you're not given these intellectual tools like humility and things like that, then it's very, very difficult to create a better society and a better world, right? And those
Kindness,
things start
generosity,
absolutely.
Just giving each other the benefit of the doubt. I think I have a book in me. I've been writing it for a couple of years, actually.
That's good.
About giving people the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Because we are not raised to think that way. We are raised to pass judgment.
Very easily.
And that's a shame.
Yeah.
That's a shame. In Yiddish, we call it a shanda.
Shanda.
It's a shanda. It's a shame. But it's something we can fix.
Right.
And that gives me hope.
What does tikkun olam mean to you?
Tikkun olam is sort of a translation of repairing the world. That's what people will tell you. It really means a little bit more than that, because it comes from a Kabbalistic background. And I don't know if you know much about Kabbalah, but Kabbalah is basically a mystical Jewish belief that began many, many years ago. And it goes relatively deep. It can go very, very deep. So tikkun olam is the concept of making the world whole, more than repairing the world. Kabbalah has a concept of the world initially being, I don't know, I forget all the terminology. It's been a few years since I studied it, but the whole world being something that was shattered at one point, and God pulled himself back from it. I don't like to say himself. God pulled God's self back from it, and there were shards everywhere. But he pulled himself back so that people could create, and to give people an opportunity to build back what had been created. He needed to do that in order for people to have an opportunity to be human. And our job is to put all those pieces back together. That's the Kabbalistic idea of what the world, why we're here and what we're doing. And tikkun olam is not just repairing the world, but it's bringing it back to a whole. That's what it means to me.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you. It's more than just doing good deeds. It's more than, there's a term mitzvah we use a lot. A mitzvah is a good deed. Mitzvah is not really a good deed. A mitzvah is a commandment from the Torah that tells us this is what you need to do in order to make this world whole again. Yeah. So mitzvot and tikkun olam and all of those ideas, I think they're all about making the world a better place.
Right, exactly.
For all of us, especially for our children and our grandchildren and so
on. Absolutely going on. 2 more questions. One, in terms of this Jewish-Muslim dialogue, what are some of the things that you are hoping to learn? We're really, very happy that you're part of it, and
thank you, Iqbal.
You have done so much, I think, in terms of you go very deep into the materials and the ideas, and you're very, very thorough, which I think really you bring a lot, I think, to the discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So what was your question again?
What more do you hope to learn from this Jewish-Muslim dialogue? Yeah.
So much. I could never learn enough. I hope to learn more about the individual people.
Okay.
More than anything. I want to learn who they are, what makes their heart tick, what really matters deep down, about, I think, for example, when we talk about the Israel-Palestine situation, I feel like a lot of us are putting out bullet points. Now, we read in the news that this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. Or we're referring to a specific story of history.
Right, exactly.
And yet there's so much more nuance, and there are so many more layers to get into. And I have very mixed feelings about a lot of what's going on. I love Israel. I am absolutely adamant that the Jewish people survive and exist.
Sure.
At the same time, there are a lot of layers to this because we're all human.
Of course, yeah.
You know, and I do see. I feel like I could argue a number of different sides of it.
Absolutely.
So what I hope to gain from it, or what I hope will happen, is just more humanity, more ability to listen, more ability to say, oh, if I knew that you were from here and you had experienced that and you had gone through this, now I see you more as a human being rather than someone who's telling me the history all over again because I've heard it all.
Right,
you know?
right, exactly.
You
Yeah.
know.
We know all the bullet points.
Exactly.
But I think what's been helpful, and I think what we'll try to do also on Friday as well, is like talking about that emotional journey, I think, which is a really important part of that.
I like that.
To think about, because a lot of times what ends up happening is that our reaction and the way that we process the world tends to be emotional. And then we kind of create a logical kind of overlay of it. So I think being able to get to sort of the emotional, and I think something that you talked about, which I think was very important, is the Holocaust. I think that is something that is in the background of this entire discussion, and this idea of what it means to have a homeland, to have safety. And, you know, that's something that's very basic. If you don't have that, then you're really not able to talk about anything else beyond that, you know. And
it's part of why I'm so grateful to be an American.
Yeah.
Because I do feel secure.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting that, you know, this background of being, I mean, you can't be any more American than being in the military, right? So, like, being part of that world and that culture, and then also having all these different layers of identity, and then being able to see the world through many different perspectives, I think is really quite remarkable.
It's interesting you say that too, because in my father's letter when he passed on just a few months ago, again, he talked about how much he loved being American. It was really important to him. He was in the service. My brother was in the Navy life career. My father was in the service. I'm sorry, I said that already. My brother, my son was in the Marine Corps for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And my husband was in the Air Force.
Wow.
So we have 4 members being in 4 different elements of the service, and I think that has influenced me quite a bit. It's a very different world than people who've never had family in the military.
Yeah.
You know.
So how did your dad react to the creation of the State of Israel?
I think he was for it initially.
Yeah.
He thought it would be a good idea, knowing everything that happened in Europe.
Right.
Over time, he became somewhat anti-Zionist, to be honest. And by the time he died, he wanted nothing to do with any of it.
Wow.
He was a little bit of a radical, and he tended to speak his mind.
Sure.
I don't know where I got that from, but he became very anti-Zionist.
Okay.
He felt that Israel had gone about becoming a state and establishing its, especially with, I won't go into specifics right now, but especially with a number of things that they'd done, he didn't agree.
Okay.
He didn't agree with what they were doing. He was always very Jewish at heart.
Right.
But he was not happy with the way things were going there.
Right. I mean, that's something that's been very remarkable. You know, working with Temple Beth Am is just to see the range and the diversity of perspectives and beliefs, and that at the same time everyone is able to come together as people of the Jewish faith.
Well, if I can tell you one thing about Judaism,
sure.
Probably my favorite thing about Judaism, is that we are taught to argue.
Okay.
We are taught to disagree. We are not taught that the Torah says this and this is what it means.
Right.
Ever. We are taught this is what we understand the language to mean, and you study biblical Hebrew if you want to get a better grasp of that. Right. But what it means, how you interpret it, and how you apply it to your life today, much less to history, is up to you. And you are respected for arguing about it. You're not told, no, you're wrong, it's this way.
Right.
You are respected for that.
Right.
And that is one thing I appreciate about being Jewish. Probably my favorite thing.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay. So the last question, similar to what we were telling Joe, but what is the message that you want to communicate to future generations?
Oh, my message to future generations is that there's so much to hope for. I think we have a lot of reason to be very positive, to be very optimistic. I look at the next generation, my kids' generation, the millennials, as they call them.
Yeah.
And they're so smart. They're so capable. They're so educated. They have such amazing resources. I believe that they will create the world through different eyes than we did. And then I look at the grandchildren. I have 2 grandchildren who are the most beautiful creatures in the world to me, of course.
Of course.
And they only know positivity. They're still young enough. They're 6 and 7 years old.
Right.
They're still young enough that they believe anything's possible.
Right.
You know, the world is a beautiful place.
Of course.
It's a beautiful place, and that's all there is to it.
Absolutely.
So, and they're growing up knowing more and more people from other backgrounds
Great.
than we did.
Yes.
And so I believe there's a tremendous reason to hope and believe that it's a beautiful world we live in. We're very fortunate to be here.
That's
and
wonderful.
I tend to look more towards gratitude
Yeah.
for what we do have than being angry and upset about what we don't have. We need to be resilient. We need to be resilient.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No one said life would be easy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that humility and gratitude are very important
Absolutely.
concepts, I think.
Absolutely critical.
For not just our ability to get along with other people, but also just, that resilience within the self, right? Spiritual
Yes.
resilience and
helping
mental.
others with resilience.
Absolutely.
I have so many people sometimes we'll sit down and we'll talk and they're so negative and they're distraught. I
Right.
shouldn't say negative. They're distraught about the state of the world.
Hopeless, yeah.
I'm like, wait a minute. Let's look at all these great things that are happening
Exactly
too.
correct,
I
yeah.
mean, there's a lot, and all these good people we know.
Right.
It can't be all bad.
Exactly.
It's hard. It's like they say you do 100 things.
Yeah.
One of them goes wrong.
Right.
What do you think about the one that went wrong?
Right.
Well,
Exactly.
wait, there were 99 other things.
Exactly
So,
correct.
yeah,
Absolutely.
That's how I look at the world, at least.
Well, thank you so much, Pam. It's been very inspiring.
Thank you.
This interview, and especially having you part of our dialogue group at Temple Betham. So thank you for your
appreciate
inspirational leadership.
And I have enjoyed this interview very much. Thank
That's
you.
excellent.
Great job.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Looking forward
Thank
to it.
you.
Thank you again.